would believe the BBC on accuracy and impartiality over Donald Trump any day of the week.
Editing out a paedophile was also a drag queen and a member of a local pride organisation. That's institutional bias, isn't it?
In this video, you're going to see everything that's wrong with our mainstream media today. And stay to the end, because I'm going to show you why the BBC scandal is actually much more personal than you think.
The point,
They're not neutral, are they?
The point is that you are trying to cherry pick to mislead people. And actually, the whole reason...
Fake news.
The reason you hate the BBC is because it's impartial.
Listen,
that's why you're threatened by it.
The current row is about this dossier that was released that exposed all these horrendous things, but the major thing being that they misrepresented the president of the free world. And I really hope Trump does sue them for £1 billion quid, because they've got until Thursday at 5 o'clock. This is the other thing. Samir Shah, the chairman, said today, I'm considering issuing an apology to Donald Trump. He should be crawling on his belly to issue an apology, because if he doesn't, they're going to get sued for £1 billion quid, and quite right.
What Mr. Butterworth means when he says the BBC is impartial is that the BBC agrees with his worldview.
It's things like editing out the fact that a paedophile was, no, not one that worked for the BBC this time, no, a paedophile was also a drag queen and a member of a local pride organisation group. So they've just removed that from an article. And then they've got reporters that work for them with I'm an LGBT ally at the bottom of their thing. I mean, that's institutional bias, isn't it?
I think the challenge you have is like all of these big state-funded or publicly funded institutions, they basically start to exist not to serve the public who pay for them, but to actually serve their own agenda and their own needs. Why no one thinks that they have any institutional bias at the BBC is because they all agree with each other. And they go to work and they say, well, did you see that article in The Guardian or The Independent? Oh, wasn't it wonderful? And that's the challenge, is there's no mindset that goes in there and says, well, actually, what do the British public think? It's all about what the BBC thinks.
And Benjamin Butterworth, the journalist who's there, I'm pretty sure he's gay as well. So anything that's pro-LGBT, whether it's true or not, I'm sure he'd be completely happy with.
And you have, and that's what people are fed up with. And let's not, it's 180 quid the licence fee. If you don't pay it, you go to prison. So I'm perfectly happy for the BBC to carry on and produce great radio programmes like The Archers and things like that, things I enjoy. But I want the British public to be given the ability to support the BBC if they think it produces content they want. And if we created a subscription, I think the BBC would actually be better.
And to hold them accountable, where if they're not telling the truth, you can't just avoid that issue by legally mandating everybody who wants to watch live TV to fund it. They should be penalised with their revenue.
But the idea that everyone running the BBC is left-wing is nonsense, because Sir Robbie Gibb was in Theresa May's Conservative government. Nick Robinson...
Theresa May's Conservative government?
Yes.
You're not going to
what did he do? Was he a political...
Nick Robinson was chair of his Conservative Party at Oxford University.
Hello, right? Nick Robinson this morning tried to
Tim Davie was a Conservative council candidate.
One of the reasons why Liberals call everybody who's right-wing far-right, because they don't realise that the Conservatives, the mass immigration, high-tax Conservatives, were not conservative. They were not right-wing.
What you're trying to do is take a handful of mistakes, and the Trump edit was clearly a mistake, and trying to make that reflective. You've had your chance. Trying to make that reflective of 21,000 employees, news output that occurs 24 hours a day across the entire globe. There are many stories which are of huge value and huge public service journalism. And the idea that one mistake is reflective of that organisation is nonsense.
What
and the truth is, I would believe the BBC on accuracy and impartiality over Donald Trump any day of the week.
What do you think he would say if the BBC published fake stories about asylum seekers, illegal migrants, black people, gay people, trans people? Do you think he would still have this tone? Shameful.
How many mistakes the BBC
I've written my notes here, Carol. So they made two a week. They made two a week, and which may not be as many as people think. But the challenge is that documentary wasn't just a mistake; it was an attempt at international election interference.
Was it?
Well, of course it was. It mashed up Donald Trump's speech to pretend that he'd called for an attack on the Capitol building. It was completely completely untrue. What may not have been successful election interference, it was still an attempt at election interference. And I predicted this time last week that Donald Trump would sue the BBC. What I predict this week is they won't get the House in order by 5 o'clock on Friday to respond, and I suspect that Donald Trump will carry out his threat.
This is the cognitive dissonance of many woke people. He's trying to suggest that the BBC putting out a documentary about Donald Trump in the run-up to a presidential election was not the BBC trying to in any way influence the election. How ridiculous is that?
They're going to lose more license players because people will listen to the statements that the chairman made today, saying that everyone's imagining the bias, and more people will drop.
And just another example of the bias at play. Almost everybody that comes out of universities these days is taught that the West and England is institutionally racist. So when this story came across the BBC that suggested there was a causation between being an ethnic minority and having higher insurance, they just ran with it. They just accepted it, even though they never questioned other factors that lead to insurance being higher when it comes to your car, right? If you live in an area with high claims, high crime, they just ran with it. And this dossier also exposed it. So it's not just about some of the macro issues, Donald Trump, Israel. It's also about the things that affect how ordinary people relate to each other, how we see each other, how we feel about the country that we live in. And now this is really important because the BBC, like it or love it, is seen across the world as a representation of British media. So when people across the world see how British media, from their perspective, treats its closest ally in the United States, interfering with their elections in this way, or covering the Israel-Gaza situation in the way that they do, what impact do you think that has on our other allies? What impact do you think that has on our enemies? It makes them think, yeah, this country is weak. This country likes to see themselves as the oppressors. They like to feel shameful about themselves. So there's an opportunity. And there's no wonder we're seeing the crisis at the borders that we're seeing. We're seeing crime going up. It's incredible. Now, many people will try and claim as well that, oh, they attacked Donald Trump. People from the BBC don't like Donald Trump because, let's see. And this is why it's personal for me and you. People at the BBC would claim that they don't like Donald Trump because he's a racist, a misogynist, a sexist, blah, 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 blah. And that's a lie. And we know it's a lie because the BBC has been full of misogynists and pedophiles and evil people. So what did they not like about Donald Trump? They didn't like the fact that he was against mass immigration. They didn't like the fact that he was against trans ideology. They didn't like the fact that he was against wokeism. And that's why they hated him. So in other words, they were willing to lie about the president of our closest ally in the run-up to an election because he had similar views to what you and I have. So what does that mean they would do to ordinary Brits? This is why it's a sham. And the fact that our government uses their control, uses the power of the state to force us to fund it through the license fee is ridiculous. It's about time they're held accountable for their lies.